Spider-Man theme by the Ramones, Steve King and Johnny Putman at WGN Radio in Chicago. Our special guest for a few more minutes, Stan Lee, the man who was responsible for Spider-Man being a household word. Stan, it is true that in your contract you have it written that the Spider-Man theme has to be played anytime you make an appearance or go into a restaurant?
No, it is. Well, actually, anytime I walk in the street or go anywhere or answer the phone or whatever. That is a cute thing. I was very sorry. We recently had a series of Spider-Man cartoons, and I wanted them to play that theme for these new cartoons, and they didn't do it. They said, no, it'll seem too old. And I said, but people love it. I couldn't talk them into it.
Yeah. Well, what do they know?
Really?
See. You have to become czar, Stan, and then your word will be law.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
A couple guys want to say hi to you at 591-7200. And Mark, thanks for holding on. You're on with Stan Lee.
Hi, guys.
How you doing, Stan?
Okay.
I met you about 15 years ago at the Chicago Comic-Con.
Oh, yeah, you were the guy with the striped tie and the loafers, right?
Actually, Reed Crandall's daughter was my teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I talked to you about Reed Crandall. You're like, I don't know where the guy wound up.
Did you have a specific question, Mark?
Yeah, I was wondering whatever happened to Steve Ditko.
Well, Steve is still around. He does an occasional job for us, but he doesn't do too many. I think he's just taking it easy now.
Mm-hmm. Mark mentioned the Comic-Con, and you were here for this year's Comic-Con. It's amazing how it's grown over the past 15 years is a good example. Now you've got people that stand in line snaking out the door and spend the entire weekend at the Comic-Con.
I know. I think they had about 35 or 40,000 people.
And are getting recognized by the local media, too, which is also nice. The things to do for the weekend, do the Comic-Con, take your kids. It's a family event. So I think that's a real positive change over the past few years.
Yeah, it's the same way all over. Mm-hmm. Here in San Diego, they have a very big one every summer, too, usually a few weeks later. And again, they have about 35, 40,000 people. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing. I mean, you go in there, and it used to be many years ago when Comic-Con started, they were just little kids. Now, I think there are more adults than there are children.
And it used to be just a guy thing, too, Stan. I can remember when we first got married, I'd say, oh, please don't make me go to the Comic-Con. I feel so odd walking around there.
Now he can't keep you away, right?
Well, now, to me, it's just fun because, as you say, I can see that it's a generational thing that they're passing it on down to their kids. And you touched on something before the news about your mom really saying, so what if it's a comic book as long as you're reading? That's the important thing.
Oh, absolutely.
And you really kind of have that attitude about comic books, too, today, don't you?
Well, today I think comics are more important because, as you know, literacy is a big problem in this country. And a comic book is really one of the few things that a youngster will read without being forced to read. A kid will read a comic book for pleasure, and what happens is that the child begins to equate reading with pleasure, and that gives them a facility at reading. And once you become a reader, nobody just reads comics, then you go on to other things. I think comics are like the first line of defense against creeping illiteracy.
Yeah. Well, and Spidey's been saying that for some time, hasn't he?
That's right.
By the way, we had some email. Some people want to know what's up with the Spider-Man movie.
Well, I tell you, we are desperate to do it. Jim Cameron, who has to be the best director, writer in Hollywood, and a good friend of mine, he wants to do it. He's the fellow who did the Terminator, and he just did Titanic.
That little thing called the Titanic,
yeah. The Titanic has made over $1 billion. It looks like it'll come close to $1.5 billion or $2 billion.
Yep.
Total. It's unbelievable. Anyway, he wants to do Spider-Man. There are a lot of legal problems, which it would take too long to explain here, which have nothing to do creatively, but other companies feel that because of deals that were made years ago, they feel that they have the right to either distribute it or to get the video sales or something. And until all of these things are cleared up legally, we can't go ahead with the movie. And it's tragic. But I think we're beginning to see some daylight in the clouds. I think eventually we're going to get it cleaned up.
Well, and there was another email from somebody that wanted us to ask you about the Fantastic Four movie. Now, if I remember right, there was actually a Fantastic Four movie that was made but never released because there is another one being made. Am I right on this?
I don't know whether I'm just long-winded or every answer requires, every question requires a long answer, but they're all complicated. There's somebody who had the right to do the movie, and his option would have expired if he hadn't done it by a certain date, and he didn't have a script yet, so he was about to lose his option. But he didn't want to lose his opportunity to do the movie, so he did this little cheapie, which he never intended to be released, just so that the contract wouldn't be taken away from him. What happened, and now he's doing a big-budget movie, but what happened was some people got a hold of the video cassette of that cheap movie, which wasn't ever supposed to be seen by anybody, and it's been circulating in the underground, and people feel, why did we do, or why are we doing two Fantastic Four movies? And I hope that wasn't too confusing.
Well, now, is there any truth to the rumor that videotape was leaked by Ken Starr's office?
Oh, boy, do you get good information. That's funny.
Let's jump back to some more phone calls. Paul, hi, you're on with Stan Lee. Good morning.
Hi, guys. How are you guys doing?
Good, thanks.
Stan, I had the great opportunity to run into you this year at the Chicago Comic-Con, and I just have to say what was the neatest thing was seeing just a living legend standing there.
Still living.
and everybody was swarming around you, but you stayed there and you were patient and took everybody's autographs and questions and pictures. I just thought that was great.
I would have sneaked away. I couldn't. There was too big a crowd. But thanks. That's very nice of you.
You know, it was kind of neat because I was, in the Marvel booth and I was wearing the Superman shirt. And you said, "What are you doing here?" kind of jokingly. And then
What makes you think I was joking?
But what was funny, though, without skipping a beat, I don't even know how this came to mind, I go, without Superman, you wouldn't have a job. And I simply was saying...
Yeah, you really ingratiated yourself.
I think my point then, and my question now was, without what DC Comics had done before you, do you think the comic book industry would have grown in the way that you took it and manipulated it into such a broad area?
Everything builds on something else, and you're quite right. If Siegel and Schuster hadn't created Superman, who knows if there would have been an industry. And we have a lot to be grateful for with Superman and then Batman. Now, actually, Siegel was a good friend of mine. Bob Kane, who does Batman, is a good friend of mine. And most of the people in the business, there are no villains. The guys at DC are great guys, and they're very talented. And I'd like to think our guys are, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Stan, let me add something to Paul's question. There's a story that I heard years ago, and you can tell me if this is true or not, that your idea for the Fantastic Four kind of came from, I don't know, was it the Justice League or something?
Absolutely, but let me tell you how it happened. My boss, at that time I worked for a publisher, and he had been playing golf with the publisher of DC Comics, which at that time was called National Comics. But anyway, he told, the other publisher told him that, he said, gee, Martin, we do the Justice League, and it's selling so well. And we didn't have any superhero teams at that time. So Martin came to me and he said, Stan, I think we ought to do a superhero team. Can you do one? So I said, sure. When you're that young, what do you know? And I came up with the Fantastic Four. So we did do a team because of DC, but we certainly didn't copy theirs. We made the Fantastic Four totally different.
I just have to say one more thing.
Sure.
I sort of, in my mind, had a premonition about the black Spider-Man costume that I think came around in 1985 or whatever. But when I was little, I used to have these horrific dreams of Spider-Man in this black costume with a giant white spider on his chest chase me around. And then when I got old enough to start reading comics, which was about 10 years old, there it was. So it totally spooked me out.
So the alien...
I hope there's not a lawsuit coming out of this somehow.
So the alien Spider-Man was affecting your dreams.
10 years earlier.
And the funny thing, Stan, is Paul only gets one call from the hospital when he made it to you tonight. Thank you, Paul.
Well, it was a pleasure
good talking to you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Stan, what's it going to take to keep the comics industry not only viable, but even more popular as we move into the new millennium?
Well, I think, one of the big problems, people love comics. It's too hard to find places to buy them.
Yeah.
If you remember, a million years ago, there were these little mom-and-pop shops.
And we know a
on
lot
every
of those
street
people.
corner.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
We know a lot of those people, Stan.
Yeah.
And over the past, I'd say, 10, 15 years, their lives have changed dramatically because the big boys have come into town and said, no, you can't do this.
I know. And a lot of the big chains don't carry comics because I guess there's not enough of a profit. It's too inexpensive an item or something. I don't know what it is. But that's the big problem. The demand is there, and it's just difficult getting the books out where people can find them. Right now, there are about, I don't know, maybe 4,000 or 3,500 comic book stores around the country.
Oh.
There used to be about 6,000, and for some reason they go out of business, and it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, without getting into all kinds of business stuff, is it the economics of the industry? Now, I'm old enough to remember being able to walk in and put down 10 cents and get a comic book. Now it is not unusual to have to pay $5, $10 for a graphic novel or something like that.
Well, those
is the
are
industry
special issues. Comics generally are about $2,
Stan,
roughly.
that's not what he tells me when he walks out with $30 a week.
Stan, work with me on this, will
Oh,
you?
don't get me in trouble. Oh, I'm in Stan now. Let's see, which one of you pays me? I can
Right.
do whatever I want.
But as you say, it's not unusual for a regular comic to be priced at $1 or $2 or something like that.
Ours, for example, our average book is $1.98. We have some special issues, but $1.98 is about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the field, I think things are going to really start picking up. What happens is the movies, the television, there's going to be a lot of that based on comic book characters, and that's going to cause a whole resurgence of interest. And then the stores are going to want to carry the books, and we'll start getting more outlets, I think.
Are
hope.
American comics distributed in Japan?
Oh, yeah. Well, some of them are distributed there. Some of them are just translated. In other words, they're not distributed, but they reproduce them over there. We license the books to them. They print them there in their own language and so forth.
I, of course, mention that because, as I understand it, there's a completely different attitude toward comics. You get on this train in Japan, and the morning rush hour crowd is sitting there reading a comic book.
It is the most incredible thing because their comic books are about 300 pages thick or more, and they contain everything, and I don't understand it. I mean, usually at any reading matter here in America, for instance, any magazine caters to a specific audience, a specific demographic. But in Japan, one comic book will have stories for very little children, sports stories, romance stories, pornographic stories, everything, all in this one book. And somehow that seems to be the way they want it. I've been there a few times, and they love comics. And I think it's one of the reasons they're so literate. Their literacy rate is so much better than ours. They, too, they read everything, and comics are a nice form of reading for them.
Do you think, though, that over the past, say 5 to 10 years, the average comic book and comic book character has been taking an approach that makes it more accessible to an adult audience? And I'll give you one specific example. Marvel Comics did a wonderful thing many years ago with a fantastic artist who, oddly enough, I believe is from the Chicago area, Alex Roth.
Oh, he's the greatest.
When he did Marvels, which was this wonderful painted series of books.
You are so right.
Oh, wow, was that incredible stuff.
So it moved the whole thing up a notch?
Did that kind of, in my mind, it moved it up a notch, and did it make it more accessible? Not only to the
comics to a different level. I mean, it made it a real, an exciting art form. I mean, it was just, it's fantastic. This fellow's work is indescribable. Now, I don't think that made it more adult in the sense that the beautiful thing about Alex Ross's artwork and the story, that book Marvels, I think it could be understood and enjoyed by a very young reader. What happens is some of the books today, the artists and the writers are trying so hard to get things that are really literary and that are very good. I mean, it's to their credit. They are trying to do a motion picture on the pages of a comic book, and some of the books are a little inaccessible for the younger readers who normally would read comics. They're a little hard for them to understand. And that's something that we're trying to work on. We've got to make the thing we always tried to do years ago was walk a fine line. We tried to make them intelligent enough for the older reader, but yet accessible enough for a younger reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're losing a few younger readers these days.
Let's take a couple of quick phone calls. Michael, hi, you're on WGN Radio with Stan Lee. Good morning.
Morning, how you doing?
Good.
Hi, Mike.
How you doing? How you doing, Stan?
Okay.
Great. I'm glad to hear your voice on the radio.
I'm glad to have it heard.
You guys were just talking about how, walking, or you were, Stan, about the walking the fine line between, younger readers and older readers. And I think that's kind of a good segue to my question, which is about John Byrne taking over for Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where is he going to be doing that for a while, or is it just going to be a mini-series? Or
Well, I would imagine that if it does well, if we like the way he's doing it, and if he likes the way he's doing it, and if the public likes it, I would hope that he'll stay there for a long time. You never know until you've done it, really.
Sure. I mean, it seems John is someone that could kind of maybe be able to bridge that gap.
He's very talented.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorites, and if anybody can do a good job, I think he's that guy.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Stan, but isn't, a matter of fact, a guy who was in our studios over the last Comic-Con, John Romita Jr., isn't he also going to be involved with this?
Yeah, we have a few Spider-Man titles, you see. We have more than one Spider-Man, and Johnny is doing one. He's a fantastic...
In fact,
he's the son of John Romita Sr., who's also one of our top artists.
I believe John is doing it along with Dan Jurgens, right?
That's right. That's right. We're very lucky. We have about the best guys in the business now. Almost everyone you name is a superstar.
And on top of being talented, they're really nice guys, too.
You're right.
Real nice family guys. Michael, good question. Thank you.
Oh, thank
nice
you.
talking to you. Bye-bye now.
And cab driver Chris, hi, you're on WGN with Stan Lee.
Hello there. Hello, Stan. Excelsior.
Hi, Excelsior to you.
I was wondering, how would one go about becoming a writer?
Oh, Stan, if you had a nickel for every time you were asked that question.
I know.
If I could think of a way to answer that quickly, but it's much easier to become a comic book artist if you're a good artist, because all you have to do is send in some samples of your drawings, and an art director could look at it in 1 minute, see you're good, and you'd be hired. But for a writer, even if you're a good writer and you send something in, it's so hard to tell, because is it the type of story they want unless you've checked with them first. Really, the first thing to do, and it's not easy, is phone the offices of Marvel and try to get to talk to one of the editors. Tell them who you are, what you've done, why you think you'd be good, see the kind of stories they're looking for, and then with that behind you, if you have an idea what they want, then you could try to write it and send it in. But just to do it cold, it's almost impossible.
Well, Stan, maybe you can ask somebody, because what Chris is asking, this comes up so often. It's relatively simple for anyone who is an artist to go and pick up a comic book and look at the art and get an idea of what to do. But where can are there books someone can pick up that would give you an idea of the style that the scripting has to be presented
Not that I
in?
know of. I have been wanting to write such a book for years. I've never had the time, but there should be such a book. I really don't know of any.
But no,
and it's a shame.
Comic conventions are helpful in this respect, too, because if you have your proposals short and sweet, I would imagine if you take them to a comic convention and you're just persistent, you can maybe get to some of these editors.
They're mostly devoted, unfortunately, to artwork. Not unfortunate if you're an artist.
Yeah.
But, usually the editors who are there don't really have the time to go over anything like that. Really, the best thing, as I say, is to call a comic book company, ask to speak to one of the editors, hope you get the guy in a good mood, and see if you can somehow establish a rapport between the two of you, and tell him what you want, and maybe he'll try to cooperate and give you some info.
Now, Stan, buckle up. Tomorrow, one of the editors is going to call you at home and say, "Why am I getting all these calls? These guys telling me Stan Lee told me to call."
Why do you think I moved 3,000 miles away?
Good move. Well, we're going to have to let you go, Stan, but thank you so much for your time. You're always so generous with your time.
Oh, I got to tell you, you two are my absolute favorites.
You're
I
so
was
sweet.
Exhausted. I didn't want to even do this tonight. Now I'm sorry we're ending this.
Oh, thank you
I love
so
you
much.
both.
And I have
Thank
to
you.
tell you, Stan, that in our office, we still have the framed Marvel No Prize Awards that you sent both of us. And you have been responsible, and I know people probably tell you this kind of thing a lot, but you have been responsible for some wonderful moments in my life when I was looking through the Fantastic Four, and all of a sudden I turned to this page and there's this full page of Galactus as he's first being shown, and one of the other things that I will never forget, the very ending page of Spider-Man, when Peter Parker opens the door, and there's this gorgeous redhead, and she says, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot."
Yeah, I kind of like that, too, I've got to tell you.
Well,
all right, as far as your guests on the show, face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot.
You're a sweetheart, Stan.
Hey,
Thank
listen,
you.
Take care. I hope we can do this again soon.
Thank you, and continued much success. We really appreciate your time. Bye-bye now.
Thanks a lot, Stan. That's Stan Lee, the man who is the guiding force behind Marvel Comics, who really changed the face of the comics industry. And I was so pleased to hear him say what he said about Blade, that one of the reasons it came out the way it did is because they kept control over it.
Absolutely. It seems like a no-brainer. I was just reading a story about Stephen King and his new book that was released on Tuesday, and his frustration over all of his movies really being translated to film. And he says the only ones, in his opinion, that ever had any success were the ones where he maintained control. Well, after a while, you would think that Hollywood would realize that that's a no-brainer. You keep the people with the vision involved to the extent that they have the hands-on, and you have a success. And Stan's just one of the sweetest guys. He
is. We've never met him face-to-face.
In 1940, if he started in the business, the way I figure, he's in his late 70s?
I think so.
Still very, very busy.
Yeah.
You get the impression that he really does have to plan his day, his time, because he's pulled. He's just constantly going and thinking and doing and wanting to do more all the time. It's really neat.
And to my way of thinking today, he is still one of my favorite writers. He does, for those of you who don't know what the soapbox is, in all of the Marvel comics, there is a column that Stan does, and basically it's a little kind of an editorial with answers to readers' questions and things like that. And in a lot of the books or the repackaged editions of the books, he does either an afterword, as he said, or a forward or whatever. I love his writing style. He just has a great writing style.
And a great sense of humor.
And you were talking with him about the educational possibilities in comic books. And one of the things I always loved about Stan is that even back in the 60s, you'd be reading a Marvel comic book, and there's a word, you'd have to stop and go and look it up.
A multi-syllable word.
Yeah, he didn't play down to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you heard him tonight, you couldn't get in, you couldn't get your email read, whatever. He is going to be doing one of his monthly chats. Go to the Marvel website on Wednesday night, or just go there, and they'll keep you up to date on when he's going to stop by and do a chat.
Or if you're on America Online, you can go to keyword comics or keyword Marvel, and that'll take you right to the chat.
Or keyword the man.
Yeah.
I wonder what you'd get if you did the man.
I have to try that.
It could be kind of scary.
Well, speaking of the man, we're going to segue.
Speaking of active old guys.
Yeah, we're going to segue in just a couple seconds. We'll take care of a little business. And we're going to segue to...
We're on the verge of the autumnal equinox.
I know. Can you feel the tension?
I can. Maybe that's why I'm all a Twitter.
Yep. And you look so good when you're all at Twitter, too. I just love it.
Well, you and Fine Fettle, I'm all at Twitter.
We are going to be talking with Roger Treemstra live from his autumnal equinox laboratory.
I think he calls it laboratory.
Yeah. So
he's a man of science,
He's having his big celebration, and we're going to interrupt the celebration to get the live coverage as the autumnal equinox hits the scene. So that's coming up.
As it befalls us in the next few minutes.
Oh, I get it. WGN Weather Channel forecast.